Thank you. So, good evening. The subject for the weekend, the human in nature, is a very ancient one, goes way, way, way back into the mist of time, and it's a very contemporary one having to do with climate change and carbon credits and things like that. And it's not an easy subject because it involves questions about what is technology. And is it good? Is it bad? Is it gray? Is it white? Is it black? Is it something we should be aware of? Is it something we should reject? Is it something we should explore? So I thought to put together some ideas. Tonight especially, I'll give a little talk about some sequences of consciousness that have to do with the question of image. Because if you look at Rudolf Steiner's work, there is a fundamental, you could say, philosophical issue between the term imagination and the term mental image. It's very useful to understand that they're not the same thing. In fact, they're almost opposite. And the word image itself goes back in time, having to do with the path of initiation towards being what was known as a mage. So we have image, mage, image, I-M-A-G-E. A mage is a seer. And in the ancient world, the mage was the person who controlled spirits, who controlled pictures. Plural of mage is magi. So the magi who came to visit the Christ child were seers who controlled images. They were kings. And they came from the east, because that's a picture also of, we could say, the outer and the inner. So the image is a kind of central task or essential issue in anthroposophy. It has a lot to do with what could be called the Rosicrucian path in the anthroposophical work. What is an image? And we probably won't have the time during the weekend to do it, but we could go, if we wanted to go quickly into deeper anthroposophy, say, Rudolf Steiner has said, Ahriman is the Lord of image. So the whole realm of imagery and images that make an impact on my soul, or images that I create in my soul and put out into the world, or images that come to my body from a higher place, or images that I actually create to transform the natural world and to lift it up into a higher order. All of those different nuanced qualities of image hinge on the role of the human in nature. The role of the human to be able to understand that their inner life requires that they understand that they need to be able to control their inner image. They need to control the inner picture in order that they can be truly human. This is an evolutionary phase in the work of the I being, is to control the inner picture. And there are other phases that go beyond the Rosicrucian work. In the future, it will be the Manichaean work. We won't get there this weekend, but for the present time, the role of the human in dealing with harmonic deception is learning how to control inner pictures. Those will be the gist of the exercises that we'll do tomorrow. So there'll be lecture, presentation, and exercise in each session. We'll do dyad work, and we'll work a little bit with alchemical imagery and see if we can't get a feeling for what this task is. The task in the esoteric language is called manas. Manas is the transformed soul body, the transformed astral body. And the code word for manas, the transformed astral body, is the name Sophia. So our task, this is a monastic age. This is an age where we are being asked to create manas, to transform our soul into Sophia. We could say that's the basis of anthropos Sophia. So the evolution of that task, the task of the age, hinges on the question of the relationship between the soul and the divine world. There's a dialogue between the soul and the divine that has to do with the the drama, we could say, or the dilemma of a creator that has created a creation that is allowed to not recognize the creator. This is a dilemma. If you've ever raised a teenager, you can get a flavor of that. What would it be to pour your life's blood into somebody and then have them take the car and run off to Tijuana? That feeling is the issue of human freedom from the creation. And the thing that allows that to happen is the mental image that the human carries in them that gives them the experience that they are separate from the creation. And that image that you carry around is your feeling that your body is your body and nobody else's. Your body is an image. You give it away when you are done with it. It's not yours. It's a loaner. It's a rental vehicle, we could say. So this question of the divine creating, if you want to have a really good picture of this, look at the book of Job. That's where this is first worked out as question and answer with the Lord and the devil and Job and his friends. What is my role as a human in the creation? So Rudolf Steiner, there's a little book, and it's called The Origins of Natural Science. And in that he gives a kind of hierarchy of how the consciousness of imagination changed over time around the issue of clairvoyance. Clairvoyance is, can I depend that the images I'm experiencing inside myself are actually valid? Or are they just something I'm making it up? I have to work on my inner pictures because I'm continually getting inner pictures from the world, but I'm not sure if my response to the inner pictures is valid in terms of the progress of creation, or is just because I'm upset about something. I have to eventually learn how to make the distinctions. And that's where the divine comes in, because the divine is the source of the great book of karma. So in the ancient world, there were two big books. There's the big book of karma, but then there's a littler book. One is called the Book of Nature, and the other is the Book of the Human. That goes back into the Middle Ages and to the school of Chartres, the Book of Nature and the Book of the Human. And it was understood that those two books had different tasks. They had different origins in a certain way, and they had different requirements. So Rudolf Steiner, in The Origins of Natural Science, gives the picture that there was a certain stage of development of clairvoyance that he called belly clairvoyance. Belly clairvoyance, the clairvoyant he gives as an example of belly clairvoyance is Hildegard of Bingen. And his comment is, Hildegard of Bingen had a beautiful stomach. And because at that time, the way in which you saw the world was you had a clairvoyance of how the sense experiences you were having in your digestion were reflected up in your consciousness. The pictures of your digestive experiences would give you what Rudolf Steiner called imaginations. Now, I'd like to present to you an imagination that starts way even beyond Hildegard of Bingen, but it's a particular picture of where that, he calls it mysticism, where the mysticism of Hildegard of Bingen had its roots. And in the ancient times, there was something called the Neolithic Revolution. And the Neolithic Revolution was a struggle between the pastoralists, the ones who wanted to kind of just follow the deer, they are known as gatherers, and the technologists, who were known as hunters. So you often hear hunter-gatherer. That's actually a term of the Neolithic Revolution. When people began to fashion spear points and arrowheads, that's actually the first technology. And it allowed them to begin to get food while the gatherers learned how to weave baskets. So you have two kinds of, like a hard technology and a soft technology arising out of the Neolithic Revolution. Now at that time, there was a particular connection to the divine where the religious impulse was through cults. There were totemic cults, totems. And one of the great totems at that time was a snake. And the snake totem represents the wisdom that you get when you come down to earth. This is then the snake on the tree for Adam and Eve. As well, you want to learn how earth wisdom is, here, bite the apple. And the time when the snake totem was really well developed was a time where a lot of the religious impulse to create artifacts was in the creation of mounds. It was called mound builders. And one of the most fundamental mounds was the serpent mound. So if you go to Ohio, there is the Serpent Mound National Monument there. From this time, there's a mound in the shape of a serpent. And always the serpent had a coiled tail like a labyrinth on one end, and then the other end was kind of a football head with an open mouth, and then in the middle was always this belly, and in the Serpent Mound in Ohio, there are these huge trees growing out of the belly. That was where the snake carried its young. And a couple of years ago, I was in England, and we were traveling through Avebury, and I said to my host, I said, this reminds me of the Serpent Mound in Ohio. He said, no, I don't think they had that. I don't think that was here. So I said, oh, okay, because Avebury is huge. The Serpent Mound is small, but Avebury is a huge thing. And we went through there was a big pathway. It was a processional. We went through there, and we ended up at the gift shop. And in the gift shop was an engraving from the 1800s of Avebury, and it was a snake with a curled labyrinth tail and a football head and a big belly. So I said to my host, hey, check it out. So why a snake? Why a pregnant snake? Well, there's a great mystery in snakes. And snakes, certain snakes, depending upon their food source, their age, the time of year, and their cycle, like in in the natural world, there's a alternation of generation. One generation is cloning, and the other generation is, quote, sexual. You know, you have gametes going together and stuff like that. There's an alternation in certain snakes between bearing their young alive or laying eggs, depending upon these qualities, how much nutrition they get or what time of year they get, how old the snake is, whether or not they have the energy to actually take the little eggs to term. There are even variations of that where the snake gets fertilized and forms eggs, and the little snakes break through the eggs inside the mother's body. So the snakes are born, quote, live, but then she expels the eggs. So in the ancient world, this was like, whoa, what is going on here? This is great, great magic. The mound builders are the time when you had the Venus of Willendorf, these great fertility cults. So imagery at that time had to do with a deep inwardness of fertility, or is that outside? And that image is the image of this issue of, do I hold the images in me? Do I receive them from the outside? Or do I create them inside and put them out? This is a kind of analog of an image quality in this sacred snake cult of what later became what we could call psychology or religion. So in the development of a human, in the embryo receives imaginations from the outside. And that continues for the first 3-4 years. In the neurology, it continues up till 21 until you get your neurons in your prefrontal cortex myelinated. You're still forming your being biologically, and that is happening without your recognizance. You are receiving signals from the outside that are completing your organism. And you continue to do that in the unconscious as you refurbish your organs. So there's a part of the human that expects that they are going to be receiving images from the outside that keep their organs in contact with their functionality. That's an esoteric view of the function of an organ. And the code word that Rudolf Steiner uses for that process of receiving imaginations that keep my organs functioning, he calls those forces coming from the outside imaginations. But in evolution of a human, those imaginations come off of the organ once the organ is complete and reflect up in consciousness as the inner life of a human. And that happens gradually as the human being becomes emancipated from the consciousness of the organs that are receiving the images from the outside. This is kindergarten, first grade, second grade. There's an emancipation of consciousness from the forming process of the organ. Today, that was not the case at the time of Hildegard of Bingen. So at the time of Hildegard of Bingen, she had access to the imaginations that were bouncing off of her digestive organs. And those imaginations that were bouncing off of her digestive organs carry the consciousness of the archetypal beings that stand behind the form of the organ. And in the ancient world, that was, your liver was Jupiter, was a god. So the form and function of your liver was the action of Jupiter. Jupiter as an archetype. So Hildegard of Bingen, according to Rudolf Steiner, represents a stage of consciousness where the soul is composed of divine archetypes. The thinking that you do is given to you from the outside. This is the consciousness of the kindergarten. Follow, 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 follow. Try that with the 9th grader. So that evolution of consciousness from Hildegard of Bingen, early on, she had access to these imaginations of her inner organs. That's why Rudolf Steiner said she had a beautiful stomach. She had a very well-developed capacity to monitor the pictures that the hierarchies were using to form her organs. She could monitor that and then bring that out as an art form. She composed music, she composed poetry, she actually had political ideas about the structure of the way politics operated in the church, based on these visions that she had. So the vision is when the image bounces up and floods your consciousness as the clairvoyant. That's why Rudolf Steiner called it belly clairvoyance. So belly clairvoyance is a way in which the natural humans interacted with the natural world. We could call that consciousness, you are a child of nature. In a child of nature, you know what needs to be done because the images are coming to you that are reflecting off of your apparatus. They come up into you as do this now. That's the way mommy and daddy deers get together. Do this now. So in the consciousness of the child of nature, your consciousness is given to you. The divine archetypes form your consciousness. And children have that still today. But through the evolution of consciousness, it was necessary for that particular kind of consciousness to become dimmed. And when it became dimmed, Rudolf Steiner gives a picture that in the school of Chartres, there was Bernardus Silvestris, who was a clairvoyant, was a monk, was a clairvoyant, and his consciousness was an evolution of consciousness away from simply receiving the images of the divine and then reflecting them up in a kind of trance state to actually seeing the soul as an image of the divine. Now, that's subtle, but if the content of my consciousness is just the archetypal world, that's different than the content of my consciousness being an image of the divine world. When it becomes an image of my consciousness is an image of the divine world, then I describe the natural world through allegory. And so the school of Chartres would have beings like Natura, the great goddess Natura, and Natura would go through these adventures and dialogues with other aspects of consciousness that were pictured as other kinds of gods. So the metaphor and simile and allegory became a way of teaching about the divine world. And nature represented, and the forces of nature represented imagery that I could make poems about, but I didn't have the feeling like I had to go into trance state in order to do it. So Hildegard of Bingen was a belly clairvoyant, and Bernardus Silvestris was starting to pull away from being a belly clairvoyant into being a clairvoyant that was moving slowly towards the faculty of intellect, the faculty of reason. Now, at the time, the school of Chartres, Natura was a goddess, an allegorical goddess, and she had two faces. She had two sides to her being. She had Natura naturans, N-A-T-U-R-A-N-S, and natura naturata, N-A-T-U-R-A-T-A. Natura naturans, natura naturata. Natura naturans is nature as a verb. Natura naturata is nature as a noun. And this is a huge difference. One is active, a becoming, an imagination of a becoming, that's naturans, or an imagination of something that has become. And when I have an imagination of something that has become, that thing that has become forms in me a mental image. The imagination of a becoming forms in me a becoming, an imagination of a becoming. And somewhere in between a becoming and what has become is this realm of image. What is it? What is an image? Is it a reality? Or is it just a convenient fable for weak minds? Is it something that we will never understand, so we should give up? Like, is it computer generated? Don't even try to figure out how this was done because you never will. Ha ha. Is that what an image is? Don't even try to figure out whether this is real, because you never will be able to. And that's the dilemma of a mind that is focused on what has become rather than what is becoming. And all of our training is to make us look at what has become and organize it cleverly into mausoleums of things that used to be alive. They're called libraries and databases. So, this idea of becoming and what has become, this is not a new thing. This goes back to Plato and Aristotle. So, Bernardus of Sylvestris was a Platonist. And Plato had, even in his philosophy, these two issues. One he called eidos, E-I-D-O-S, or eidos, E-I-D-O-S. And eidos was the action of an archetypal being that was known as IDEA. There was a hierarchy of beings known as the ideas. We say, oh, I have an idea. But in the ancient world, they say, an idea came to me. Oh, it's my idea. Oh, really? You would never say that in the ancient world because you understood it was a being that was inspiring you. So for Plato, eidos were beings who lived in an archetypal realm who were generating forces, generating becomings, generating potential for things to become. And then for him, there was the appearance of those beings in the mind of a person that could tune their mind to the realm of the ideas. And when a person could tune their mind to the realm of the ideas, and the idea appeared in their mind, Plato's term for that was phenomenon. P-H-A-I-N-O-M-E-N. Our word phenomenon comes from that. So for Plato, an idea created a phenomenon. But the phenomenon was the appearance of an idea in my consciousness. It came to me. His pupil, Aristotle, said, yeah, okay, but we have this other thing down here. We have like stuff here that we have to put into categories. We have to use our reason. And I need to work with those phenomena in order to get them in line with what's happening in the world. So Aristotle had those two different qualities, but he had a different word, where Plato said eidos, as an archetypal being, for Aristotle, that was called hale. And hale in Greek means wood. But for wood. But for Aristotle, wood was something that had potential to become something else. But can you feel the difference between this is an archetypal being that lives in an archetypal world that's creating becomings in my mind to it's a piece of wood. And then for Aristotle, instead of phenomenon in my mind, it was morphe, the body of the thing. So Aristotle said it goes from great archetype all the way down to the thing here. And I have to organize the thing here with the pictures that I have in my mind. And that changes my relationship to the natural world because my soul is starting to not be a repository of archetypal beings. My soul is not even an image of the divine because I'm the one that is doing the thinking. So my soul becomes a vessel for ideas about the divine. That's subtle, but it's a big deal. So as my soul becomes a repository of ideas about what could be divine, I start to turn my focus towards the physical, visible world as the place where I need to spend most of my mental energy manipulating inner images about the things that are in the world so that I can unite my thought processes with the reality of what's happening in the world as an actual entity, a physical appearance. Now, that split in the ancient world was carried through the Middle Ages. Even then, Thomas Aquinas carried that through something called adequatio. It just means equating. And what Aquinas said was, I have to equate the thing and my mind. Meaning, I have to make my mind connect to the thing. But for Aquinas, the thing was a spiritual reality. And for us, the thing is the chair that's here. I have to try to figure out how the chair was made here. And we carried that over. So why even bother about this? Well, during Rudolf Steiner's time, there was a teacher, Franz Brentano. And Rudolf Steiner used to go to his lectures when he was an undergraduate, Franz Brentano. Franz Brentano was a very famous lecturer. And he was a Thomist. He was trying to revive the philosophy of adequatio from Thomas Aquinas. So it's kind of ironic if you know a little bit about Rudolf Steiner's work. Brentano was teaching Rudolf Steiner, who was a reincarnation of Thomas Aquinas, about Thomas Aquinas. There's kind of a little loop there. Rudolf Steiner talks about Brentano's work in Riddles of the Soul. And Brentano, as a teacher, was caught with the problem of what happens when I have a sense experience of the natural world. And he went back to Aquinas and started with the idea of adequatio as being something where I have to equate the thing in my mind, but over time, what was happening at the time, physiology was finding the neurology of the optical systems and stuff like that. Medicine was kind of grounding everything in the experimental method. And as that consciousness started coming down into the physical world, nature was studied as a corpse rather than a becoming. So this is dissection and things like that. The first vivisection was a student of Aristotle, Thales. So that started a whole process going through the renaissance of digging up corpses and doing autopsies and making drawings of things like that until finally, if you wanted to be a medical person, you had to cut dead people up for a while before you could earn your spurs. So that consciousness coming down into matter at the time of Rudolf Steiner and Brentano, Rudolf Steiner went to the lectures of Brentano, but eventually understood that Brentano was going a little too deeply into the sense world. Eventually, Brentano became kind of the only thing that matters is the sense world and the optical systems that are interacting with it. He became sort of a physiologist of the optics and sense experience. But Franz Brentano, along with Rudolf Steiner, had another student, famous student, and that was Edmund Husserl. And Husserl is the founder of Phenomenology. And phenomenology is the study of phenomena. And in that stream, we get to the work of Goethe. So Goethe was a phenomenologist as an idealist, and Edmund Husserl picked up the work of the German idealistic Goethe and said, Goethe was pointing at something. And Husserl rebelled against Brentano and eventually said, the only thing that matters is the mind. So if you study phenomenology from Husserl's point of view, he rebelled completely against Brentano and developed a methodology of phenomenology just of your own mind. Brentano developed his phenomenology just of the sense experience. So they split what Goethe had tried to hold together. And that is, I have to do a phenomenology of my mind while I'm doing a phenomenology of the sense world. I have to somehow walk that very fine line. So in the language of phenomenology, there's two levels of studying phenomena. And this is what we'll work with tomorrow. The first, the working of phenomena, or the observing of phenomena, in the philosophical language of phenomenology is called epoche, E-P-O-C-H-E. And an epoch is a bracket. So we get our word epoch from that, a bracket of time. So in epoche, the person who's doing an experiment in phenomenology in the natural world will take an object from the natural world and bracket it in such a way that they just keep their attention focused on that object and try to describe the object without any additions of their own stuff. They simply describe as best as they can the morphology of the evolution of a plant, say. And Goethe, in his Metamorphosis of Plants, found the ideal object of phenomenology to study phenomenology of plants, because plants ideally make a leaf after a leaf after a leaf after a leaf. So your job of creating a picture of a plant growing in your mind is fairly easy if you want to take the time. However, Goethe struggled with the phenomenology of geology. He wrote extensively about geology because when he was a minister of the court, he was a minister of minds. He had to understand geology, so he traveled around for a year with an artist through Europe, and they sketched rock faces in order to understand geology. And he tried to make a morphology of geology. He made a famous essay about granite, and it starts out very geological and then suddenly gets a little poetical. Because he was struggling with, how do you make a phenomenology of something you can't see changing? This is not an easy thing, because when you can't see it changing, you start to add things from your own mind. So the struggle that Goethe had to hold this together was solved, in my estimation, was solved because he looked at plants. And then when he looked at animals, it's possible to look at the morphology of vertebrae especially, because there's a morphological shift in vertebrae. you can see an awful lot of morphology and change in the natural world by studying vertebrae. So he did that, and he found the vertebral origin of a bone in the skull. Great phenomenology. However, there is an issue, and that issue is in classical phenomenology, the looking out at the object is called local epoche, local bracketing, local. Your observations are local because you're studying that thing there changing there. There's another branch of phenomenology, the relationship to nature, and that is called universal epoche. So local epoche was what Goethe was doing, and universal epoche was what Husserl was trying to do by saying the most important thing to watch in the phenomenology is the stuff that your mind is doing while you're trying to do a phenomenology. And we could take that issue of phenomenology, of when I learn phenomenology by observing the natural world, then my next task is to turn that organ that I develop in the phenomenology of the natural world on my own phenomenological process. And when I do, I run into the phenomenology of my own soul. And Goethe, as an explorer, said, I'd rather write novels about that. So it was up to another great explorer for that work of exploring the soul to take up the task of developing a phenomenological organ in the soul and then turning it on the soul. And that great explorer is Rudolf Steiner, who gave us the methodology to the meditative work of taking the phenomenology that we learn in the natural order and applying it to the life of the soul. He calls that then the eye of the soul, or the heart of the soul, and that's the root of the Rosicrucian work in anthroposophy, is to develop that organ of perception of the soul. Now, it's based on ideas in the theosophy of the Rosicrucians and all of these books that Rudolf Steiner wrote about the work of Christian Rosenkreuz. That Christian Rosenkreuz, according to Rudolf Steiner, came back to teach how to make a bridge from Hildegard of Bingen into contemporary phenomenology. He came back to teach his people how to do that. And the way he taught them was that in order to do that, you have to first you have to study, this from Rudolf Steiner, you have to immerse yourself in the science of your day. You have to take up the task of the science of your day and penetrate into the natural world and the forces of the natural world with your mind to the point where you understand that the reasoning power that you use to do that is a force that is under your own control. The only place you can learn that is here, through the resistance of the materials that you have to manipulate to make a building or to build a table or to cook a meal. You have to follow certain protocols that are pictures of the imaginations of the way the divine world structured the physical world. You can't reverse things in certain sequences. You have to follow the laws. So the only place we can learn to actually form the organ of perception of the natural world in the right way is in the physical world by encountering the scientific consciousness. And that scientific consciousness puts us in contact with the death force of the divine world, the divine continually creative creation falling into matter that must die. But it's a schooling of consciousness because the sequences of how that happens is a training in phenomenology. But then I have to learn to understand that, like Bernardus Silvestris, that those images that I take from the world really are allegories. They are in the work of the Rosicrucians, they are symbols. They are symbols of soul states that are archetypal in the realm of freedom of human beings. We're getting very close now to the idea of homeopathy and medicine. That a substance is a process that has come to rest. The substance is a metaphor of an activity. It's a pattern of becoming, because when you take that substance, it activates forces in your organism that respond to the archetype of how that substance came into being. This is silica as a homeopathic remedy. It's just dirt, but there was all kinds of dirt. So the human has the capacity to liberate silica from the intention of the divine and to move it into another realm. But they have to use their imagination that has fallen to go through the death process of the silica and reform it again into something of a higher order. And the only place they can actually get the inspiration to do that is not in the physical world, but in the world that's just above the soul. And that is where my I being lives, watching me muck about in the dead stuff here and wanting to form a bank account based on it. So my I being understands that I have to muck about here because it's the only place where the rubber meets the road. But it also understands that I have to eventually lose my infatuation with mucking about here in order that my soul transforms the things that have fallen back into a spiritual world. Rosicrucian talks about this in many places. This is the task of the Rosicrucians. He says, we have to give nature back to the gods. And you know how it is with a rental car. It has to be in a better condition than when you drove it off the lot. So we have to lift nature to a higher order. This is the work of the alchemists. This is the work of Paracelsus, Basil Valentine. A chemical process to take nature apart and then put it back together again and lift it to a higher order of functioning, in order that the imaginations that live in the corpse can be freed from the belief that the corpse is what matters. The corpse has in it forces of the imagination that formed it. Those forces that formed it animate it and create the potential for the consciousness to arise of the creator, of the divine within that organism. This is the Rosicrucian path. But I have to learn that I learn how to do that and form that heart organ here, but I can't make it work here. Because when I try to make it work here, I still have the abiding experience that I am a being that's separate from the natural order. My body gives me that. So where do I go? I have to learn to take the imaginations that I'm creating of the natural world into sleep. The doorway to that is the famous exercise by Rudolf Steiner, the Rückschau, or the daily review. If you go back into the root of the Rückschau, you'll find the work of Christian Rosenkreuz, teaching his pupils how to go into sleep in a sacred manner. Teaching his pupils how to take pictures from the natural world as an inner discipline of forming them and dissolving them and forming them and dissolving them right before you go to sleep, in order to allow your guardian angel to take the energy of the will in the pictures, back into the realm on the other side where that will harmonizes with the will of the hierarchies that stand behind the thing you're studying. This is equating the thing and the mind. But I need to take it into their realm, because in their realm, they can take that will and take it to the place in the cosmos where it's most effective, where it has the most transformative capacity, and they bring it back to me in rapid eye movement dream states. And the function of rapid eye movement dream states in neurology is to create new neurons so that I can change my life. So you make 10 times more neurons in REM sleep than you do at any other time. So if I wish to make my dreams productive, I have to first learn how to build the hut. This is Knowledge of the Higher Worlds, Chapter 9. I have to learn how to build a hut. I have to learn how to take my soul forces apart. I have to learn to live in the continuity of consciousness that both worlds, I'm living two biographies at the same time. I'm living a biography here that comes in and out, and I'm living a biography there that takes the fruit, or the salts, the energetic salts, the homeopathic frequencies of my will, and saves them in a bank account that I'll be able to cash in at the end of Vulcan. And when that happens, the earth will become a sun, according to Rudolf Steiner, in a cosmos of love. And that's our task. And Christian Rosicrucian came back to teach us not the end game, but the turning point. We have to have an organ in the heart that can imagine these kinds of imaginations in order that when the Manichaean age comes, when the big ticket item comes, we have to learn how to love the evil good. That's Mani. That's the teaching of Mani. But you can't do that unless your heart has an organ of perceiving the difference between goodness and simply effectiveness. We're struggling with that today. We have technologies that are effective. The question is, are they good? And if you ask something like that, you're deemed as a Luddite or you don't get it. Well, it works. Yeah, but is it good? So the perception of good is a heart perception having to do with uniting beauty and truth and goodness in a moral dimension. Moral has nothing to do with anything that comes from the outside. So in this hierarchy, I have to learn to divorce myself from the things that come from the outside in order that I can find myself and then offer myself back to the outside and say, is this what you were trying to tell me? And they take it into the realm where it gets rectified, and they bring it back to me, and then I meet somebody in my daily life who reminds me that that's what I'm doing. And when that happens, no one can take the expansion of consciousness that comes from that experience away from you. That goes into your great Swiss bank account in the sky forever. It's the perception that there is the ever-present help of the spiritual world. And from my understanding, this is the core of Rudolf Steiner's teaching for the present age, is this Rosicrucian alchemical work on the soul. But it includes all of the above. It includes a kind of mystical nature about perceiving the becomings of the natural world as imaginations. It perceives seeing them as poetic allegories of the way in which the soul is structured from the divine world. And it needs to be a vessel where reason determines ideas about how God is operating. This is what Job's issue was. And God, Jehovah God, had a bit of a learning curve from a little mere human, Job. Just a question. Job said to him, I demand of thee, show yourself to me. And when Jehovah showed Job who he really was, where were you when I made a Leviathan who can just trash anybody? And where were you when I can, Job said, well, I only heard about you before, but now I see you. And now I repent in dust and ashes. However, Jehovah then said to Job's friends, why are you persecuting my friend? Because Job's son, the devil, got him into a bit of a dilemma. So there's the human, in Rudolf Steiner's work, is the linchpin, is the fulcrum, is the rectifier for the cosmos to go from a cosmos where everybody's playing the same tune and your imaginations come from your digestive organs, and that's what makes you do things like an amoeba, to how you need to be a vessel for very clear ideas about the divine that you learn to give to your higher self through sleep, and then you retrieve those images in the morning. In the study of man, Rudolf Steiner gives a picture that is the archetypal task of adult education. An adult has to learn to form pictures in such a way when they're going into sleep that they can retrieve them again in the morning. When you do, those pictures go deep into your heart and they allow you to see your fellow human beings with a little bit more divine nature than we normally do. So, thank you.